Hey, everybody, this is Alex Merced, developer advocate at Dremio. And if you haven't already, I highly recommend heading over to YouTube and looking up my. Yesterday, I was part of the Anant's table weekly data engineers lunch, where I did a presentation of my table format comparison presentation. I have presented it before a couple months ago at the Subsurface meetups, which if you're not a subscriber to the Subsurface meetup group, so you can find out about those meetups, which have been great. We just did one on Arrow. We have another one we'll be announcing soon on Data Mesh, so make sure you don't miss those. Join the Subsurface meetup group at meetup.com. But I did an updated version of the presentation, because the features are constantly changing, circumstances are constantly changing. So again, keep an eye out because I'll probably be doing that presentation again down the road with even further updates as things change on the ground regarding data lakehouse table formats. In there, I answered a bunch of cool questions, so I highly recommend watching that. But here, what I'm doing is I'm following up, and I have two questions that were put to me that I promised that I would answer here on a Twitter space. The first question was a response to a tweet that I made asking people, like, what questions would you like me to answer? And this was a question, where do I see sort of like table formats 2 years down the road? And I will get to that question. The second question being, how early in a company's life cycle should they start considering, building out a data lakehouse? Which I did partially answer during the event yesterday, but the Zoom cut off. So basically, I like the last 30 seconds of answer I wasn't able to give. So I'm going to re-give my answer. Okay, so as far as like where do I see table formats 2 years from now, I do think probably sort of the whole question of Iceberg v Hoodie v Delta Lake will probably still be a very much like a hot topic 2 years from now. I think probably like 10 years from now, that question will be settled, or more settled. I don't think like necessarily like any of the three formats will just disappear, but I do expect like maybe over the next decade, one will become sort of the standard. And again, just like all technologies, no technology ever goes away because generally, if you've already invested in X technology, it's going to oftentimes be cheaper to just pay to maintain than to necessarily migrate. So it's kind of like when you think about people who still have like legacy COBOL based systems, they don't want to redevelop the whole thing, even though it may be better, in the long run, better to do so. And their short run costs say, hey, it's smart to maintain it. So basically, you're going to have people who invest in each of the three formats, and they'll still be investing in those formats 10 years from now. So like, I'm not necessarily thinking that any of them are going to go like kaput like that. I don't expect, but I do expect one of them will be dominant. Generally, probably, if you've listened to my podcast, you've seen my presentations, you probably have a good idea of sort of like my opinion and what my opinion is, and maybe I'll touch upon that a little bit later on. But bottom line is like that is what I'd expect. So 2 years from now, you're going to still see a vigorous battle, because right now we're still sort of in the early stages of that battle. So like, from just like sort of objectively, like right now, like Delta Lake has this huge head start because they were like the first of the three. Databricks is this huge platform that really offers a lot of benefits when you're using Delta Lake. But it's like the only platform that really can provide you that level of benefit. And I think like in the long run, that's going to be sort of like the fly in the ointment. So like, while a lot of Delta Lake has been sort of open source, like there's still a lot of control over that project from Databricks. A lot of the more innovations and benefits are coming at different parts of the Databricks platform, like Photon, which are not open source. So in the sense that like the ability for other platforms and tooling to really like invest in Delta Lake and be able to like compete on an even playing field, it's going to deteriorate over time, in the sense where basically you'll just kind of have Databricks. So basically, you run that risk that in the long run, if you invest in Delta Lake, you end up in that vendor lock-in where you're stuck having to use Databricks, and that's your only option, meaning you got to pay that bill. So that's generally like my concern with Delta Lake. When it comes to Hoodie and Iceberg, they're a little bit, again, you're going to see a lot of new platforms coming out for both of them over the next sort of year or so. Okay, like the one I probably have like the most familiarity with, of course, being a Dremio developer advocate, is going to be Dremio Arctic. which is going to provide you which already provides you, even though it's in preview, a really cool Nessie-based catalog for Iceberg, which allows you to have sort of those Git-like semantics, which allow you to do like multi-table transactions, which is really cool. Like I think a lot of people don't really appreciate like how amazing that is. So again, let me just like paint that picture. So basically, right now you could use like a data warehouse, and you could do like a transaction that occurs. So you say begin transaction, you do a bunch of SQL queries across a bunch of different tables, and then you say end transaction. And what's going to happen is that all those queries won't commit to after they're all complete. The benefit of this is that one table won't be complete, won't be changed before the other table is. And the reason why that's important is because you might have like 2 or 3 tables that are used in a join, but if only one of those 3 tables is updated, and a query comes in that joins those 3 tables, comes in between those updates, you could end up having a set of data results out there that's really inconsistent because 2 out of the 3 sources haven't been updated. So generally, the idea is you want all those transactions across multiple tables to occur at the same time. You want them to be committed at the same time. So any queries come in, queries consistent data. So with a project Nessie-based catalog, which is what Dremio Arctic will offer your Iceberg-based tables, you could essentially create a branch, do transactions to all your tables in your Arctic catalog. And the cool thing is, it's not just across like just Dremio. So when you're using a data warehouse, you have to use the data warehouse's tools to do this whole multi-transaction statement. What you can do with Dremio Arctic is any tool that can connect to an Iceberg table. So you could do updates in Spark, updates in Flink, updates from Dremio, any tool that connects to that catalog, and then merge that branch back into the main branch. And all those transactions show up as just sort of one singular commit, one big multi-table transaction. So you get that multi-table transaction, but now you've expanded it where multiple users can work on the data across multiple tools, making multiple transactions when you have that branch semantics. And again, it happens at the catalog layer, which means there's a really nice SQL use of it, in the sense where you could have SQL scripts that create a branch, merge branches, unlike other options for versioning that don't necessarily have SQL semantics, where you generally have to do it through like Java or Python, which may not necessarily be as accessible for every data consumer and every data engineer, as versus like SQL, which everybody knows SQL because it's the thing. Okay. So, and if you hear my bird in the background, yes, I do have a cockatiel that's chirping back there because I'm sure she hears my voice and is like, oh, there's Alex. So there's that. I will close the door. But moving on, so that's one big platform. But again, you're also going to have other companies that are going to be offering services like this, where basically that really kind of give that more bigger sort of holistic picture to what sort of Databricks offers to Delta Lake, in the sense of, hey, you don't have to worry about optimizing your tables. You don't have to worry about all these different sort of features that you would normally expect on the data warehouse and have them available for those data formats. So you'll see that over the next couple of years, Iceberg and Hoodie will have platforms that provide some of that stuff, and that's going to sort of really sort of start changing the equation. Okay, because at the end of the day, you're going to have those services, but those services aren't going to necessarily be like, you're not going to have the bundling of the engine and the optimization services all in sort of one product. So like even on Dremio, the engine Dremio Sonar is a separate product than Dremio Arctic, sort of the optimization, the catalog. And the benefit of that is, again, you get that openness. So basically, if you're using Iceberg and you're using a service like Dremio Arctic, you can use Spark, you can use Flink, you can use, you can even use products like Trino and probably Snowflake and whatnot. Still use them with those tables that are cataloged by Dremio Arctic, and Dremio Arctic can handle a lot of those table optimizations for you once it's in general GA. So that's going to be like something that's not necessarily like quite the same in the Delta Lake world, where basically, again, you have the engine, you have the optimization services, and lots of other really cool things, but they're all bundled in being a Databricks customer. So you don't have necessarily like this more sort of robust atmosphere. Instead, you have like a lot of companies on the other ends, like receiving the data out of Databricks or helping to get the data into Databricks. But then Databricks kind of provides that full middle layer, and then other tools are allowed to for the most part, provide some read access, but they can't really provide what Databricks can provide for Delta Lake tables. So again, you end up in that sort of single vendor ecosystem for a lot of different layers of service, which you won't necessarily have with like Iceberg and Hoodie. And then Iceberg has shown to have a really robust set of companies that are really embracing it from, again, of course, Dremio, but you also have like Cloudera, Snowflake, Bodo just put out some stuff about Iceberg. So like a lot of companies are just really rallying around Iceberg. So that generally is going to paint a very optimistic picture for what the future is, whatnot. But again, also I'd expect over the next 2 years that, again, the feature parity is going to be there. So things that each format doesn't have quite yet is probably going to get there. So basically, again, a lot of those types of services I just talked about that, there isn't really like a platform for that has it quite yet. Probably in the next few months, you're going to see that for like Iceberg. I mean, I think OneHouse is the company that's going to be providing a lot of that for Hoodie. I don't know when that product is expected to sort of like hit the market, but eventually Hoodie will have something like that. So basically that gap will soon, and then probably eventually Delta Lake will have some sort of row level operations. It's like merge on read, which is something that Iceberg and Hoodie both take advantage of, which is a really cool technique for speeding up writing that Delta Lake currently doesn't have. But again, over the next 2 years, you're going to see all three of these. Anything that they don't currently have that the others do, they're going to be just kind of like getting that closer to that parity, to where it makes sense. Because again, sometimes they have a feature that compensates for the absence of another feature. So it's, but they're going to get closer and closer to essentially having the same sort of set of features. So it's going to come down more and more to ecosystem. How many different engines can I read and write with? How many different tools? The idea is having options, so that way you can really tailor things to your use case. So, summarizing my answers just in the next 2 years, I don't think not the fight, but like the question of which table format is the winner will be answered. I think that's when we'll be at the heights of that sort of question. And, basically each format will sort of be at their peak, be able to make their peak argument for themselves. And then again, over the next 10 years, I do think it'll be clear. And then the question we'll be asking is going to be something else. So I mean, basically, if we sit there and we kind of walk that road down, we get to that place where now everyone's kind of using mostly the same table format. There's a couple of really strong tools that compete against each other in analyzing that data and whatnot. Sort of what becomes sort of like the next big question, like what's going to be sort of like next big feature. And a lot of that's just going to always comes down to like, what is the end goal? The end goal is to get insights. So, once we have data pipelines and access to data figured out, where basically access to data is easier to engineer and easier to have access to, then basically the next question becomes, how can we better take that data and turn it into actual insights? So I guess like a lot of the AI stuff becomes even more salient. And I don't mean like, there's a lot of AI startups right now, but in the sense that like, hey, if you got all this other engineering stuff kind of figured out and more standardized across the whole stack, then it becomes easier for there to be a variety of sort of like AI layers on top of that to help more quickly take that data and turn it into insights. But now kind of hard because basically that's just the actual access layer is so diverse and complicated and whatnot that different tools for different AI are kind of really going to depend on what stack you have, and that makes it kind of hard to have sort of like, again, that level of competition that really drives even more innovation. My opinion. Okay, this is all my opinion. Me just talking off the top of my head. Okay, so now that I've kind of talked about that, like where do I see things in like personally in like the next 2 years, versus the next question was, how early should someone start Lakehouse? Honestly, the fact that there's the Dremio cloud platform should mean that every company, if you're a startup and you're just starting out and you're focusing on building your application, there's no reason to just build your data lakehouse. You literally can just build it in an afternoon. Okay, so I mean, let's imagine a scenario here. You're a startup. You're particularly using, MySQL or Postgres as sort of your main transactional data store for your application. you can just basically open up a Dremio cloud account for free in this afternoon, a few minutes, and then you can add your MySQL database or your Postgres database as a data source. And you can use the data reflections feature on Dremio to create reflections of those data sets. Without getting too deep into what reflections are, basically what it's going to do is it's going to allow you to do analytics on the data in your Postgres and MySQL database without creating some sort of tug of war on resources. Okay, so because they're essentially what the reflections are doing is materializing and creating an analytically optimized materialization of that data set. Essentially, when you run analytics from Dremio, on the Dremio side, you're running it on the materialization, but the materialization is going to stay in sync with what's in your database based on your settings. So essentially, again, at no cost, the only cost will be when you actually do analytics on any clusters you run. And then as you grow as a company and your needs become greater, okay, you can start saying, hey, you know what, I maybe should move this into an iceberg table, because now we're going to do a more formal data pipeline. And you sit there and ingest the data via, like, let's say, streaming into, and again, right now maybe you'd probably use like a Flink or a Spark streaming to do that, and you would stream them into your iceberg tables in a Dremio Arctic catalog, which again, no cost to adopt that service today. But again, down basically sooner than later, you're going to have additional services with that, where, especially over the next few, like very soon, for like optimization and keeping that data you want, sort of just managing it under the hood with things like compaction, so that way you don't have to worry about optimizing that data. It's just good to go for analytics. But then down the road, maybe additional like ingestion features and whatnot to make it just really like point and click. So it's a platform that grows with you, but it doesn't lock you into anything. Again, later on, you want to use Spark, you want to use Flink, you want to use Dremio Sonar, you want to use whatever to analyze the data you have sitting in your Arctic catalog. Go for it. Okay, and then once you connect your source into Dremio Sonar, if you're starting again in the early stages with your MySQL or Postgres, that data can go into whatever BI tool you like. It can go into Tableau, it can go into Hex, it can go into Power BI. So you're not necessarily locked into anything, and your data is still in, let's say, in the early stages in your Postgres or MySQL database. So you haven't made any big movements that are going to cause you to have, to cause any kind of migration pains later if your needs change. And that's the beauty of the Dremio platform. Like, it's open at every level. It's really easy to adopt really early on as a company, because again, like, there's no upfront costs in buying it, like actually opening up an account. And the only cost will incur when you're actually running analytics. If you're running a cluster, and then as you grow and you need like enterprise support, you can definitely there's definitely packages and offerings for that, but you get that when you need it. But for now, you have this great platform that's going to offer you the tools you need to start running analytics earlier on. So to me, like, every company should at least have a Dremio Cloud account now. Like, there's no reason not to have one. Like, doesn't require you to move any of your data. There's no, like, again, you only pay as you go. So basically you pay for the clusters that you need, and later on, if you do enterprise contracts, those are different deals. But again, having an account doesn't mean you have to have that. So there's no reason why everyone should not have a Dremio Cloud account now. Okay, and signing up takes like 5 minutes, and you connect your AWS account and you're good to go, and you can run analytics at scale on data, and again, in your transactional databases, on your cloud storage, in your AWS S3 storage, from your AWS Glue catalog. There's just really no reason not to just have a Lakehouse by just quickly signing up for Dremio Cloud. It just, yeah, like, there's every reason to do so and no reasons not to do so. So in my sense, like, if you're a startup and you're the CEO of a startup and you're just saying, hey, let me just build out this infrastructure now, take 5 minutes, sign up for an account. It's there when you need it. It's there, and then you can set up an accounts for any data analysts you hire under later, so they can have access to the data, and you're good to go. And you have full visibility into what queries are running, what data they have access to, all this stuff in sort of one layer. You have this nice access layer for analytics, and it just becomes really, really easy peasy, and makes sort of like that enterprise high scale analytics available to anyone and everyone. So that's my take. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed that. My name is Alex Merced, developer advocate for Dremio. I'll talk to you all later. Have a great day and enjoy.